Scotland is one of the few places on Earth where the landscape feels alive, where wind cuts across ancient stone as if delivering messages from thousands of years ago, where mountains rise like sleeping giants and lochs hold stories that predate written history. And this raw sense of untamed beauty isn't just scenery, it's the heartbeat of a nation built on resilience, rebellion, and a fierce sense of identity. Because Scotland is not merely a place on a map, but a symbol of endurance, a land shaped by volcanic fire, glacier-carved valleys, and storms that have sculpted cliffs and coasts for millions of years. And the people who live here have inherited that same rugged spirit, a defiance that echoes from the ancient Picts to the modern Scots who carry centuries of pride, struggle, creativity, and cultural brilliance. And in this video, we travel deep into the roots of Scotland, not just its breathtaking landscapes, but its history, its legends, its heroes, its thinkers, its fights for freedom, its rich traditions, and its complex role in shaping the modern world, revealing how a small nation forged an identity so powerful that even today, it stands as one of the most recognizable, romanticized, and fiercely celebrated cultures on the planet. When most people think of Scotland, they imagine bagpipes echoing across misty hills, kilts swirling at Highland games, and castles silhouetted against dramatic skies. But the real Scotland is far more layered and astonishing than any postcard stereotype. Because this nation, though small in landmass and population, has played a disproportionately large role in global culture, science, engineering, philosophy, and political thought. And understanding Scotland means understanding how a land shaped by hardship and isolation became a birthplace of innovation, where thinkers like James Watt sparked the Industrial Revolution, where philosophers like David Hume reshaped modern reasoning, where writers like Robert Burns championed the human soul, and where modern creators continue to influence film, music, and literature. And yet, Scotland's identity is deeply tied not only to intellect, but to emotion, to the intimate connection between people and land, to the sense of belonging that comes from ancient clans, Gaelic traditions, and an almost spiritual reverence for the Highlands. So this story is not just about a country, it's about the tension between wild nature and human will, about how a nation with a harsh environment produced some of the world's warmest, most passionate storytellers, and why, even now, Scotland remains a symbol of independence, perseverance, and cultural pride. Long before the Scotland we know today existed, the land was inhabited by mysterious and resilient peoples whose cultures have been partially lost to time, but still whisper through standing stones, burial cairns, and enigmatic carvings that dot the countryside. Because the ancient Picts, one of Britain's most elusive and fascinating civilizations, left behind a legacy of symbols, fortresses, and artifacts that continue to baffle historians. And these early tribes, along with Celts who later mingled with them, formed the earliest foundations of Scottish identity, forging communities in harsh climates, building hill forts, conducting rituals, and living in harmony with the land's unforgiving terrain. And their stories, though fragmented, reveal a Scotland that has always been shaped by resilience, where survival required unity, where spiritual beliefs were tied to nature and ancestor worship, and where oral storytelling carried knowledge across generations. And as waves of Romans attempted to conquer the north, these early Scots resisted with remarkable success, pushing back against one of history's most powerful empires, proving that the spirit of defiance, something central to Scotland's national identity, was present long before kingdoms, flags, or borders ever existed, setting the stage for the cultures and conflicts that would eventually define the nation. When the Roman Empire marched into ancient Britain, they were confident, organized, and ruthlessly efficient. Yet even at the height of their power, they met a force they could not conquer: Scotland, or Caledonia as they called it, a land where rugged landscapes and fierce tribes made invasion not only difficult, but nearly impossible. And Rome's repeated attempts to subdue the region resulted in some of the most dramatic military failures of the ancient world, forcing them to build not one, but two massive defensive walls, Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, to contain the northern tribes. And this moment in history is more than just a footnote. It is proof that Scotland's identity is rooted in defiance, in refusing to be shaped by outside forces, and in protecting its culture against overwhelming odds. Because the Romans were masters of assimilation, but the Picts and early Scots were masters of guerrilla warfare, using knowledge of the land, mobility, and hit-and-run tactics to frustrate the empire. And in the end, the Romans withdrew not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked the ability to break Scotland's will, leaving behind a legacy of ruins, legends, and a symbolic boundary that still stands today, as a reminder that even the greatest empire the world has ever known could not claim this land. After centuries of tribal conflicts, migrations, alliances, and the blending of Pictish and Gaelic cultures, the early medieval period saw the emergence of a more unified Scottish identity under leaders like Kenneth MacAlpin, who is often considered the first king of what would eventually become Scotland. And this unification was not a simple or linear process, but a complex evolution shaped by geography, warfare, religion, and political strategy. Because as Christianity spread across the region, thanks in part to figures like Street, Columba, the tribes began to find new forms of cohesion, forming alliances that strengthened their resilience against external threats, such as Viking invaders who raided the coasts and islands with devastating force. Yet despite this, the early Scots adapted, defended, and ultimately absorbed influences from Norse settlers, creating a hybrid culture in the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland that survives in language, art, and folklore even today. And by the 10th century, the foundations of a Scottish kingdom were firmly in place, marking the beginning of a national story that would be defined by fierce independence, powerful rulers, legendary warriors, and centuries of struggle that carved the identity of a nation determined to remain distinct, even as empires rose and fell around it. When the Viking longships first cut through the North Sea and crashed onto Scotland's coasts, they brought not only terror, but transformation. Because the Norse were not simply raiders, they were settlers, traders, and empire builders who reshaped Scotland's islands, languages, and culture in ways that remain unmistakable even today. And while the image of fierce warriors with axes and shields storming monasteries is partially true, the Vikings did conduct brutal raids on places like Iona. It is equally true that they left behind a legacy of place names, traditions, and bloodlines across the Orkney Islands, Shetland Islands, and the Hebrides, creating communities where Norse and Gaelic customs blended into entirely new cultural identities. And the battles between Scottish kings and Viking jarls were not just fights for land, but for cultural dominance, for control of trade routes, and for influence over the North Atlantic world. Yet, ultimately, Scotland did something remarkable. Instead of being erased by Viking power, it absorbed it, tamed it, and integrated it into its national identity, proving once again that Scotland is a land defined not by conquest, but by adaptation, resilience, and the ability to transform external threats into internal strength, shaping a nation that carries Norse echoes even in the modern day. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Scotland was no longer a loose collection of tribes, but a developing medieval kingdom, attempting to balance tradition with emerging structures of monarchy, law, and feudalism. And this era saw the rise of powerful dynasties, the influence of the church, and the creation of early Scottish institutions that would shape the country for centuries. And during this time, kings like Malcolm III and David I implemented reforms that brought Scotland into closer connection with Europe, introducing Norman nobles, reorganizing land ownership, and founding burghs, early towns that became centers of trade and urban life. Yet Scotland remained culturally distinct, preserving Gaelic traditions, clan loyalties, and Highland ways of life, even as the lowlands became more connected to continental political trends, creating a fascinating dual identity that made Scotland one of the most culturally diverse medieval societies in Europe. And this contrast between Highlands and lowlands, between clan-based societies and feudal monarchies, would become one of the defining tensions of Scottish history, shaping everything from social structure to warfare, while also giving Scotland a richness and complexity that continues to influence literature, music, identity, and national pride today. Few chapters in Scottish history are as dramatic, emotional, and fiercely remembered as the Wars of Independence, those legendary conflicts against England that produced heroes whose names echo across centuries. Because when King Edward I of England attempted to dominate Scotland in the late 13th century, he sparked a resistance movement that would become the foundation of modern Scottish nationalism. And out of this struggle rose figures like William Wallace, whose guerrilla warfare tactics and defiance made him a symbol of rebellion, long before Hollywood dramatized his story, and Robert the Bruce, a complex but brilliant leader who united Scotland's nobles and delivered a decisive victory against England at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. And these wars were not just military confrontations, they were battles for identity, sovereignty, and the right of a small nation to determine its own future, culminating in the Declaration of Arbroath, one of the world's earliest expressions of national freedom, which famously proclaimed that it is not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we fight, but for freedom alone. And even today, these stories fuel Scottish pride, political debates, and cultural memory, proving that Scotland's identity has always been forged in the fire of resistance and a refusal to be controlled. As Europe entered the Renaissance, Scotland found itself pulled into a whirlwind of intellectual and cultural transformation. But unlike Italy or France, where art and science flourished in relative stability, Scotland's Renaissance was intertwined with violent political shifts and a religious revolution that would forever redefine its identity, because the Protestant Reformation, led by fiery preachers like John Knox, shattered centuries of Catholic tradition, closed monasteries, and ignited conflicts that divided families, regions, and rulers. And this upheaval coincided with a period of royal drama involving Mary, Queen of Scots, a charismatic and controversial monarch whose tragic life continues to inspire novels, films, and debates, whose imprisonment and execution by the English crown turned her into a symbol of both political intrigue and Scottish martyrdom. And as Scotland embraced Protestantism, it also produced remarkable thinkers, scholars, and writers who contributed to a distinctly Scottish intellectual tradition, one that would later blossom into the Scottish Enlightenment. And although this era was turbulent, it laid the foundations for modern Scotland, reshaping its governance, its religious landscape, and its cultural identity in ways that still influence everything from architecture to politics today. When Scotland and England formally united in 1707 to create the Kingdom of Great Britain, it was a political and economic decision made by elites, not by the general population, and this moment remains one of the most controversial and emotionally charged events in Scottish history, because while the Union offered economic stability after the disastrous failure of Scotland's colonial attempt in Panama, the Darien scheme, it also meant the loss of Scotland's independent parliament, provoking widespread protests, riots, and a sense of betrayal among ordinary Scots who felt their nation had been sold rather than merged. Yet despite this political union, Scotland retained its own legal system, education traditions, church structure, and cultural identity, creating a unique situation in which Scotland was part of a larger state but remained culturally distinct. And over the centuries, the Union brought both advantages and tensions, contributing to the Industrial Revolution, global trade, military alliances, and scientific progress, while also fueling nationalist sentiment that would later inspire devolution movements and independence referendums. And understanding this union is essential to understanding modern Scotland, because the debates surrounding national identity, autonomy, and cultural preservation are not new. They are echoes of arguments that began the moment the ink dried on the Treaty of Union. If there is one chapter of Scottish history that blends heroism, tragedy, loyalty, betrayal, and national mythology into a single, unforgettable story, it is the Jacobite Risings, a series of rebellions in the 17th and 18th centuries that aimed to restore the exiled Stuart monarchy to the throne of Britain. And while the political motivations were complex, the emotional core of the uprisings came from the Highland clans who saw the Stuart cause as intertwined with their own cultural survival. Because for them, supporting Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, wasn't just about backing a king, but about defending a way of life rooted in clan loyalties, Gaelic traditions, and Highland identity. And the Jacobite story reached its peak during the 1745 Rising, when the prince landed in Scotland, rallied thousands, marched as far south as Derby, and captured the imagination of a nation with promises of restored rights and independence. But the dream ended in tragedy at the Battle of Culloden in 1746, where the British Army crushed the Highland forces in a brutal, swift massacre that effectively ended the clan system, resulting in harsh punishments, land seizures, and the banning of tartans and Gaelic culture. And even though the rebellion failed, its legacy lives on in songs, literature, and modern nationalism, turning the Jacobites into symbols of Scottish bravery, romantic idealism, and the heartbreaking cost of fighting for a lost cause. Following the defeat of the Jacobites, Scotland entered one of the darkest periods in its history, the Highland clearances, a slow-burning tragedy in which thousands of Highland families were forcibly evicted from their ancestral lands by landowners who valued sheep farming and new economic models more than the people who had lived there for generations. And this ruthless transformation reshaped the Highlands forever, turning once thriving communities into haunting landscapes marked by abandoned crofts and empty glens. And the clearances were not a single event, but a long process that unfolded from the late 18th to the 19th century, fueled by industrialization, changing agriculture, and a cold, profit-driven mindset that treated human beings as obstacles to economic progress. And families who had lived in clan territories for centuries found themselves displaced, often shipped to coastal towns, forced into poverty, or pushed onto boats bound for North America, Australia, and the Caribbean, sparking a massive Scottish diaspora that spread Highland culture across the world. And what makes the clearances even more painful is that they weren't simply economic decisions. They fractured identities, destroyed traditions, and broke the communal bonds that defined Highland life, leaving scars that remain visible in modern Scotland through depopulated regions, cultural memory, and a collective sense of loss that fuels ongoing conversations about heritage, resilience, and historical justice. In one of history's most astonishing intellectual achievements, Scotland, a country still recovering from rebellion, poverty, and political upheaval, became the center of the 18th century movement known as the Scottish Enlightenment, a period in which philosophers, scientists, economists, and writers produced groundbreaking ideas that reshaped global understanding of reason, morality, society, and government. And what makes this era extraordinary is that it emerged from Scotland's unique culture of education, debate, and critical thinking, nurtured by universities in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and St Andrews. And figures like David Hume, Adam Smith, James Hutton, and Adam Ferguson challenged old assumptions and introduced revolutionary concepts. Hume questioned the nature of knowledge and emotion. Smith laid the foundations of modern economics, and Hutton developed the theory of deep geological time, all while salons, coffee houses, and lecture halls buzzed with arguments about politics, religion, ethics, and human behavior. And the Scottish Enlightenment wasn't limited to elites. It influenced everyday thinking through widespread literacy, print culture, and community learning, helping shape democratic ideals that would inspire revolutions, constitutions, and modern political systems. And this period remains one of Scotland's greatest contributions to humanity, proving that even a small nation can ignite an intellectual wildfire that changes the world forever. As the Industrial Revolution swept across Britain, Scotland became one of its driving engines, transforming from a rural nation into a powerhouse of invention, shipbuilding, engineering, and manufacturing. And what makes Scotland's role so impressive is how deeply it shaped global progress, from steam engines and steelworks to railways, bridges, and medical innovations. Scottish engineers were at the forefront of technological change, and Glasgow in particular emerged as a world-class industrial city, known as the Second City of the Empire, where shipyards along the River Clyde produced vessels that sailed every ocean on Earth, while inventors like James Watt revolutionized industry with improvements to the steam engine that powered factories, mills, and transportation networks. And beyond engineering, Scotland became a hub of scientific advancement, contributing breakthroughs in medicine, chemistry, and physics. Today, Scotland stands at a crossroads shaped by centuries of history, cultural pride, political evolution, and a renewed sense of national identity. And modern Scotland is defined by a fascinating mixture of tradition and progress. ancient Gaelic songs blending with contemporary music, centuries-old castles standing beside cutting-edge universities, and rugged Highland landscapes coexisting with modern cities like Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Dundee. And since the late 20th century, Scotland has increasingly asserted its political voice, gaining its own parliament in 1999 through devolution, expanding its control over domestic affairs, and reigniting debates over autonomy and independence that continue to shape national discourse. And regardless of political stance, what's undeniable is that modern Scotland is confident, culturally vibrant, and globally influential, a leader in renewable energy, a hub for the arts, a centre for festivals, and a country known for its hospitality, humour, and fierce sense of identity. And whether Scotland ultimately remains within the United Kingdom or pursues a different path, the core of its identity remains the same. A nation built on resilience, creativity, and the unbreakable belief that its voice matters, its history matters, and its future belongs to its people.